Welcome to the podcast, John. For our listeners today, this is one of my clients who I've been working with for quite some time, and I really wanted to interview John today about his experience of coaching. I'm going to let him introduce himself and then basically tell me whatever he'd like to tell me. So, John, over to you. Tell us about you.
Thanks, Dex. Yeah, so hi, everybody. My name is John Parsons. I'm a physician in the United States and the Midwest, and I have a pretty high level job at the academic hospital I worked at, where I'm in charge of clinical operations for a group of physicians of roughly 700 physicians. And that particular job was busy enough. And then when the COVID pandemic became critical front and center, my job was amplified and became much more intense and somewhat overwhelming. And so as I started navigating through that pandemic, the initial phase of the pandemic, I started to notice that I was experiencing some burnout feelings. And I didn't really recognize them in myself at first. My family started to recognize some things that I was doing when I would come home from work. Basically, the frustration, the anxiety, the stress, the constant worry, the constant never putting the job out of my brain just started to melt me a little bit, to the point where I felt sort of like a shell of myself. Yeah, I would go to work and I would be very successful, and nobody at my job would know that I was having these issues. But my family did, and I did, and realized that I was burnt to a crisp in terms of my work-life balance. And so that's when I reached out to Dex. And that process was interesting because I'm not, most men aren't going to want to get onto a podcast with a guy they don't know and start telling him what's going on with that. That was an incredibly difficult barrier to sort of climb over initially. But once I started doing it, Dex is extremely disarming, and it just became part of my daily routine. And as Dex mentioned, I've been working with him for over a year. So that's sort of a quick introduction of who I am and what I do and where I am today.
Thanks, John. And what do you think was the specific thing that you thought you might achieve with coaching, or that you wanted to achieve?
I didn't really know, to be honest with you. I was so lost. When you get into this burnout phase, you don't even know where to, and you don't even recognize it sometimes. But it surrounds you, and it's all encompassing. But one thing I quickly started to think about is way too much of my self-worth and my identification of who I was as a person and my contributions in my life were tied up in my job. And a lot of the satisfaction I would get, and a lot of the, ego boost, but a lot of the things that, drove me to be ambitious and to be successful with feedback and successes I would have at my job. And I started to realize as I got older, I'm almost 50, that, I can't work forever. And what am I going to do with myself when I'm done with, my job? And so I realized that I needed to start building other aspects of myself, my self-worth, and things about me outside of my job. Probably the biggest thing to start.
And when you came to talk to me the first time, what reservations or doubts or fears did you have coming in?
Oh, wow. There was quite a few. Well, the first one was that you weren't going to be able to help, that I was going to invest my time and resources to work and wasn't going to be successful. So I had pessimism in my brain that this was going to work. And also the intimacy of the conversations we had. You can't break things down until I allowed you to come into places where I haven't allowed a lot of people to come, and we chatted about things that, weren't comfortable. So that was probably the biggest one. And then being afraid of what I might feel or might recognize about myself, and maybe feeling guilty about the things that I wish I would have done if I would have been able to sort of navigate myself, 25 years of that. Would I have been able to have a more fulfilled experience if I would have been able to use these tools that I use now? So
Probably people are going to listening might relate to some of that. But what do you think? What was your experience then when you began coaching? What was your experience in those early weeks? Do you recall what that was like for you?
Yeah, so I remember the first time we talked to one another, I was like, hey, this guy's a cool dude. I mean, he's got a cool accent. He's nice. He wasn't too probing. We just sort of chatted, and then, it was sort of a disarming conversation. And then that was like my consult call. And then when we agreed to work together, the first few weeks I had like some, I don't know, homework assignments, but some exercises to do to sort of work through some initial thoughts. And you need to do that. It feels like you're doing homework. Sometimes it feels like you were doing chores. And I was like, why the hell am I doing this? And then it starts to get easier and you start to use the tools. You're like, what is this going to do for me? And then first couple of times you use it and it like, wow, I guess I see it. And then it sort of snowballs on, as you build the foundation of the things you can do. So I thought the first time we worked together, I think this is our third or fourth session, I can't remember, but the first session, a few weeks that we worked together, it was basically like chipping away at stuff, and figuring out, getting to the root cause of a lot of the thoughts and stuff. And that takes time. And so that's also hard for people like me because we're not patient. And the work that's necessary to get success is just got to do it. So the first few weeks, it's a little bit of a grind, to be honest. Yeah.
I would agree. There's a big kind of tool set or skill set to be learned in the beginning. So what do you think then, when you stuck with it through that, what do you think started to change for you in the first weeks or months?
Yeah. Right out of the box, I stopped doing a lot of buffering behaviors that I was using to, I don't know, numb. So my eating and my alcohol habits and things that we're using just as a buffering crunch they went down quite a bit. I started to look for things outside of work that I might like to do. I spent a lot more time with my wife and my two sons than I had been. I made dedicated efforts to do that. And then I started to give myself, probably the biggest thing is I started to learn to give myself some grace that if everything hadn't been done when I left the office, we're going to live. We would come back the next day and we would start again. Or if it was a mistake made or someone was pissed off at me, I'd give myself the grace to understand that that's their thoughts and their feelings. And I would accept that. That takes a long time, that to get to even now. I mean, I'm still working through and it's a daily thing where I have to give myself grace for things that happen in my life and not take them personally. So those are probably the biggest things to start, and then my sleep habits I wasn't getting enough sleep. When I was sleeping, my sleep quality wasn't great because I might be laying in bed thinking about stuff. And, the brain drain started to get better as I went through it.
You kept coming back for more coaching. What were the surprises or what were the achievements you made that made it appealing for you to keep going?
Yeah. So when our first session was towards the end, I wasn't sure I was going to do it again because I felt better. But looking where I am now, I look back at that and it's unbelievable how far I've come from that point in time to where I am now. And so I basically said, well, I had a really good experience with this and I feel a lot better, but let's see what the next session could offer us. And then the next session was a little different. It wasn't like all the fundamental foundational tools. It was refining those skills and refining those habits a little bit. And so, that one I remember was we talked about empathetic leadership. We talked about more about grace for yourself. How about life is being 50-50, and everything's perfect. Everything's going to be perfect. Sometimes things suck and it's out of your control. And sometimes people are going to be pissed at you and you can't make them not be pissed at you. And so then it started to like really take off at that point. People were asking me, hey, how you, like something different about you, and I didn't really even know what the hell they were talking about, to be honest with you. But I just felt more calm and sort of more just confident and whatnot. The other big one I recall very clearly from that second session was in my job, I have to get up in front of people all the time, large groups of people. I also do a lot of media for the university, go on TV. And so they keep asking me to do it because they think I do a really good job, but it would just be like this 2 or 3 day ordeal of stress and anxiety about what people are going to think about me. How do I look? Do I sound okay? How did I do? And pretty much that evolved into, I'm just going to do the best I can. I'm prepared and I'm going to be me. And if that's not good enough for them, that'll be fine. But I know that's fine for me. And that really was where it started to get my self-worth and my grace for myself really started to explode. So,
When you look back on it now, when do you think, how long do you think it took you to start coming out of burnout?
wow, it took at least 1.5 of the sessions that I would say probably 6 months. I mean, I would say at the minimum, just to get yourself, you know, it's almost like coming out of the ditch, and hosing the mud off of you, and then you finally look at yourself, and then once you work through all that, then you start to see where can I go from there. And so that takes, I would say, probably 6 months at the minimum. And one thing I have to say, it's not a passive process. It's like going, if you want to lose weight or you want to get fit in the gym or you cut your mile time down when you're running, it's like an everyday thing. You got to work. Not a lot, not all the time, just a dedicated space of time each day to work on it. But it's not overnight. And I would say at least 6 months at the minimum, probably.
I think when you came to me, it was kind of that perfect storm of COVID that had been added to your professional experience. But when you think about that now, if something like that happened again, do you think you'd drop back into burnout?
I don't think so. It's actually happening again right now. We're in the midst of another surge of COVID, and I basically am telling myself we're going to do whatever we can do, and we're going to be as prepared as possible. But I'm not personally responsible or hold it against myself if everything doesn't go perfectly. We're just going to do the best we can. So we're in the throes of it now. I'm pretty chill. And part of that's just because of the skill sets I've been able to work through a little bit. And then having more transparent relationships with my family and my coworkers too. I mean, I've talked to you about this. I've not hidden that I've been doing this coaching for my coworkers. I've actually referred some folks to Dex who look like they're struggling with burnout. So that freedom of expression has really been helpful too.
Speaking about that and about relationships, what changed for you outside of work?
Yeah, I mean, that's a complicated question. Social anxiety, I didn't have a lot of close relationships with people, partly because I'm so busy, but I would avoid things, the risk and intimacy of friendships, because I would be like, well, maybe they're not going to like me. I've had a complicated relationship with my family. Not that sounds negative, it's just complicated. And I would intrinsically blame myself for a lot of those issues. I realized that I can only control who I present myself as, and their perception of me is their perception of me. And so a lot of my relationships have become calmer. My wife and I barely ever have any major arguments anymore because that cauldron of frustration and anger that you have from your job, it doesn't need to bubble out. Very transparent relationships with my two boys who know that I've been doing this work for over a year. And my relationship with my family, my parents and my brother, it's pretty chill right now. So all those things I really sort of give credit to this work because I'm not judging myself in those relationships like I was before.
Yeah, and you did make reference to doing the work, and my observation is you really have put in the work that was going to propel you on your journey. You've really shown up for yourself at quite a high level. And it really has been a pleasure to work with you on that. So I'm just curious now, while we've been talking about some of these things, maybe things have popped into your mind. Are there other things that you might like to say about your coaching journey?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things about this kind of a journey is that it's not a continuous journey. There are going to be some spots where you're going to have some setbacks. And so one of the things Dex and I talked about quite a bit when I first started was this concept of the stoplight, where basically you're driving down a road, occasionally a red light is going to be in the intersection, you're going to have to stop, and then you can keep going the same direction. And so there will be times where I would have a bad day or a couple bad days, and that didn't mean that the whole thing was derailed. I mean, it just was the reality of human existence. And when those would first start happening, I would blame myself and have no grace and think I sucked and I was a failure. But then I realized that's just the reality of who we are. And so everyone's going to have a bad day here and there. And I would wake up and we would keep going. And then the other thing is I've really started to look at helping other people with these similar problems. I'm by no means a coach, but when you've gone this yourself, you start to recognize signs of stuff like this in other people. And so I've connected with some people at work in a way that I never would have before by talking through some of this stuff. And as I mentioned, a few of them have started to work with that. So and I think the last thing I would say is probably the hardest, and it sounds counterintuitive, but you really have to love yourself first. If you don't take care of yourself and make sure you are being true to yourself and giving yourself love and grace, you can't be successful giving it to other people if you have a terrible self-image. And that took me forever to figure that out. And it'll never be super easy for me, but I recognize that all the time I'm saying, I just got to give myself grace here. And that's not my fault. Shit happens. Just got to keep living through here. It's probably the big ones, to be honest with you, that I can think of off the top of my head. There's others, I'm sure.
And anything else that you wanted to add before we close off today?
Only that I would say that, there's probably a lot of you out there that are type A, go guys who probably are a little closed off in terms of your willingness to discuss your struggles, emotions, burnout, whatever. But it's a disarming process. It's not stressful to talk to docs or to any coach, frankly. And I would highly recommend it. It has not affected my ability to do my job and be successful here, but it's totally transformed my ability to enjoy my life as I'm doing it. That's probably what I would.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here today, John, because I think it really helps people to hear your story and your experience. I myself have had a burnout experience and can relate to a lot of what I'm hearing from you. So I think it's tremendous that you have been here, and thank you so much.
Thanks again, Dex. Appreciate you.